Serious. Eerie towns, disappearing diners, and creepy gas stations. What's your true unexplained story of being in a place that shouldn't exist? Back in 2002 when I was in second grade, we took a walking field trip to a pizza parlor. We had to walk through a small canyon woods in order to get to town. Along the way through the woods, we all notice a little cabin off in the distance in the middle of nowhere. It felt so out of place since there were no other cabins. We were all creeped out, and our teacher told us a witch lived there, so we walked past as fast as we could. Nothing crazy happened, but all these years later, I pass by my old school every once in a while, and those woods we walked through aren't there, and everyone I ask says they never were. Where the heck were we? A good friend of mine is a sheriff's deputy out in West Texas. While visiting him, he took me as a ride-along on an overnight shift. He took me down one back road that had creepy stories attached to it in the local lore. He himself said that you couldn't predict how long it took to drive down it. Going the same speed down this dirt road could take 20 minutes or an hour, with no other variables to speak of. He also had mentioned that there were 3 creepy old bridges that we'd cross. So we get to the road, it's the middle of the night with no lights around except our headlights, and let me tell you, that place had an eerie vibe. I am not superstitious at all, but this was just weird feeling all around. We crossed the first old bridge, and sure enough it feels like we're going to be swallowed by some demon living beneath it. We survive, keep trucking down the road, and just as we're crossing the third and so far most creepy bridge, a call comes in over the radio. My friend responds, saying he'll be there, but we're on, name of road, and it could be at least a half hour or maybe not. Dispatcher doesn't blink at the lack of time estimate, she knows this road. At this point, we've been down this road for at least a half an hour, but he speeds up a bit, as fast as we could safely go on the dirt road, to get to the call and join the other officers on scene. A couple minutes later, we cross another creepy old bridge, just like the others. My friend pauses the conversation a second and asks, "Wait, how many bridges does that make?" I respond, "That was 4. Why?" "Because there are only 3 bridges on this road." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure, I've been paying attention to them because you talk them up so much." "That was definitely the 4th. How many do you remember?" "Yeah, I thought that was number 4 also." "Man, I told you this road was haunted." 20 minutes later, we're on the highway going in the opposite direction parallel to the old road. My friend points out the 3 culverts in the highway's banks as we pass them. Those are for the 3 rivers that the 3 bridges on that road go over. Not 4. The next morning, I check Google Maps. I traced it from start to finish. Zoomed in to see the details. There are only 3 bridges on that road. My friend was moving cross-country, and I flew out to help her drive. We both suck at navigating, so on the second day, we found ourselves on some back road in West Virginia in the middle of the night. Neither of our phones had service, but our Garmin faithfully led us on detour after detour until finally we were led to a completely closed road. We decided to go the opposite way of the GPS. Several minutes later, the trees and random shacks gave way to a literal oasis. There was a freaking resort community in the middle of absolutely nowhere, lively and wide awake in the middle of the night. The streets were cobblestone. The streetlights sparkled, there were fountains and flowers everywhere. We felt like we were on a tropical island. There were upscale designer stores, Louis Vuitton and the like. We saw an open restaurant, and even though we looked like sloppy peasants, we went in to ask for directions. A waitress cheerfully explained that the closed road we had seen was not really closed, it just looked that way. She told us we could still take it, and it would get us out to the freeway in a jiffy. She gave us some free cheesecake in beautiful boxes and wished us safe travels. We got back on the road, returned to the closed road, and carefully drove around the closed signs. We drove through the absolute darkest section of road I've ever seen, and sure enough, found the freeway shortly after. We pulled off at the first motel we could find and went to sleep, and spent most of the next day Googling the town. We still haven't found it. The whole trip was gone from the Garmin. The cheesecake boxes were gone from the car. We wanted to go back, but at the same time, we were completely terrified, like, what even just happened? Not the most interesting story, but I grew up in the middle of nowhere, and some of my relatives lived a few minutes walk from my house up a hill, and they had woods behind their houses. I used to explore the woods all the time. I knew the paths and places well. You couldn't go too far because there was a cliff and an incredibly deep lake beyond the cliff. Anyway, one day while walking, I see an old log cabin. It was sitting in the middle of a field I had been to many times before. It was a bright and sunny day. The field was lit up in gold. The cabin was very dark and strange. I felt like I shouldn't go near it because I knew it shouldn't have been there. I was very confused to suddenly see this cabin, which had never existed before. I left the woods but went back numerous times looking for the cabin again. Never saw it again in my life. And I do know the location it was in. I wasn't lost. And again, there are only a few places you can go back in those woods since there is a cliff and a lake. It's not like miles and miles of woods before you reach the cliff. Was moving across country with the family and we are in the middle of New Mexico and it's late, so we decide to stop at a hotel at the next town because we are tired and the kids need to sleep. It's really dark and no streetlights, but we pull off in this little town, go right to the hotel, get a room and all is well. The person at the front desk seemed alright. We get up the next morning and I look out the window and there's just all these ramshackle homes that don't look occupied all around this little motel. Garbage and stuff piled up everywhere. Okay. Whatever. Just some odd folks. Nobody else was staying in the hotel. We were the only ones. The guy running the front desk in the morning was creepy. Okay. So we get in the car and figure we'll hit McDonald's for breakfast. Every town has one, right? Not this one. Okay, so we'll hit that little grocery store up the street and just get some stuff. My wife says she'll go in and I stay in the car with the kids, 2 of them are really little in car seats, so not worth pulling everyone out of the car. 2 minutes later, she comes out quickly. Drive. Get the fleeb out of here now. What? Why? Just go. Just get the heck out of here. Okay. I spin the tires on the minivan and go. Once we are safely on the freeway, she explains to me that the only people in the grocery store were these creepy old people that all wore the same kind of old school clothes. Not a huge deal, maybe a religious commune or something, but she said they all stared at her the entire time she was in there. She was going to get yogurt for the kids, but noticed that it was all expired. Then she was going to get those little boxes of chocolate milk. Those were expired as well. Not just by a few days, but by months. Then the people started walking towards her while she was looking at the other perishable stuff. Anything dairy was months expired. Bread on the shelves was moldy. She said it was like someone stocked the shelves 6 months ago and everything was just left there. The creepy old people were slowly shuffling towards her, and that's when she came running out. She was really freaked out, and so was I once I heard about it, but I wanted to turn around and go back and check it out for myself. What are you, nuts? That's how horror movies start. No way are we going back there. Okay, so I have one. I was going for a drive around my hometown, and I decided to turn into a road I didn't recognize. This stood out to me because I live in a small town and I know its layout by heart. As I followed this winding road, the New England forest thinned, leading to a hilly area. The hills stretched as far as I could see. On top of each hill was a small house, which were all identical. There were no lights in the windows, no cars in the driveways. No trees. Only dead grass and empty houses. After about 10 minutes, I passed a woman walking her dog. She looked at me like she had seen a ghost, as if she was in total shock that someone had driven by her. I kept driving. The air smelled weird. I don't know how to describe it, but it was kind of metallic. I drove for another 20 minutes and eventually saw a road leading to a patch of woods, and I followed it. I emerged from where I had entered and got back onto the roads I was used to. I have never found that road again, or those houses and hills. I have looked on Google Maps and searched the area in person, but I have never found anything. The area that I had entered was a marshy forest with no roads leading in or out, and it was nowhere near large enough to conceal the vast area that I had driven through. To this day, I am bothered by it. I grew up a short distance from the Olmsted power plant in Utah. I'd ride my bike to the canyon where it sits and ride up the bike path. One day, I rode to the canyon entrance and was playing around the river. I was probably 10-ish at the time. A young boy, probably around 7 years old, came over and started talking to me. We played and talked for a few minutes, and then he asked if I wanted to meet his grandma. Of course, being a kid, I went with him. There are some homes near the power plant and I remember walking into the area with him and wondering how I had never noticed them. The grounds were well kept and the large old trees as well. The houses were very old but looked like they were well maintained, and there were old people everywhere. Every other person there, other than the boy, was a senior citizen. They all looked happy and were sitting on porches or walking around and talking. I do believe the boy introduced me to his grandma who was sitting on the porch of a 2-story white building. Then we played by the river that runs alongside of the homes. After a while, I said goodbye and headed home. I rode my bike to the canyon often, so it wasn't long before I was near there again. No people, none at all. No one had lived there, as far as I know, in a very long time. Once I was walking through the woods with a friend of mine and we were just messing around, telling jokes and climbing on trees. After about a half a mile out, we found a small shed. We had no idea who owned it, so like idiots, we went inside. It was pretty dark since it was under a couple of huge trees and also early in the morning, so we had to turn on our lights on our phones. When we could see, we found a huge collection of pictures, all seemingly having no context. Some pictures of people, some of animals, and some of places. The pictures were from all around the world too. There were even pictures of the Colosseum and the Great Pyramid. They were all stuck on the wall with one piece of duct tape. But then we started to notice some weirder photos. We saw a photo of Eric Harris, the one from the security camera in the lunchroom, and a no-clothed man with a bull hat on. Then we noticed in the corner of the shack was a camera that most likely shot most of these pictures. We didn't want to steal anything, so we left. We told a couple of friends and they were interested and we went back to the shack with them. But instead of finding the shack, we found a chair exactly where the shack was. There was a picture of the shack on the chair and that's all we could find. I never found out who owned the shack and where it went. I'm a choir lad whose choir is fortunate enough to be invited to the Royal Albert Hall a few times each year. Usually our dressing room is in the equivalent of the basement, not as fabulous as some of the big shots, but most of the time the boys invited are younger than 16, so they're always worried we'll break something. Very close to our dressing room is something called the Artist Bar, as the name suggests it's a bar for the performers, and drinks and snacks are sold at an extremely discounted price. As an example, if I were to go upstairs to one of the public cafes or bars found around the building, I could be charged around £4 for a sausage roll, whereas I could get the same thing at the Artist Bar for £1. As I'm over the age of 18, I'm allowed to head to the Artist Bar if I want to buy some food. We're regarded as responsible enough to not blow anything up or get trapped in a tuba or other acts of stupidity. They're quite capable of a well-brewed cup of tea, still don't know what brand they use, so I like to head down to make sure I don't decide to take a snooze on stage, something one of our tenors did a few years back during an actual performance. The show was to start at 1 p.m. and we'd arrived early. It was 10:30 a.m., so we had plenty of time. Because for some reason, everyone tended to like being last minute, nobody around was really dressed and likely wouldn't be until about 5 minutes until we were expected to be on, so I was wandering around in a shirt and jeans. I was caffeine deprived, so I decided to go get a cup of tea. All the other chaps are in the dressing room, being watched by the chaperones, so it's just me heading up to the Artist Bar. I remember it being frightfully quiet in the hall, which wasn't unexpected, but it was sort of chilly, which for some reason made me feel a little tense. I turned into the room and noticed a selection of people who were obviously older than myself wearing formal attire. It was of very brief interest to me because caffeine triumphed over anything interesting in my surroundings. I remember thinking that I felt like I was walking into the Overlook Hotel. I expected to be greeted by Jack Torrance at any moment. I also remember one gentleman wearing a tuxedo with a white bow tie, which was sort of weird because the orchestra commonly just wears plain black and the other choirs were doing the same. The gentleman was wearing what our conductor would be wearing, but he wasn't the conductor? I shrugged, got to the counter, and there were two girls there. What weirded me out more was the way they were sitting. There are 2 or so chairs usually on the left side of the bar, so whoever is on shift at the time doesn't need to stand infinitely. They're stationed at the left wall, so the servers aren't faced towards me, but I can see their faces. If I was a server, my customer would be forward, then right. Both girls are sat backs against chair, legs on the floor, and their hands placed perfectly forward on both legs. There's a small smile on both their faces, but they're looking straight forward, not at me but at the opposite wall. They look sort of like dolls, and they're sat in silence until I snap out of my bemusement and cough a little. Excuse me? One of the girls stands up. The way she moves is honestly ridiculously robotic. It's another thing that's a little disconcerting because she first stands, walks forward, still smiling, then suddenly turns at a 90-degree angle to face me, in silence. Hi there, I was just hoping for some tea? Her smile widens, but when she speaks it's in monotone. I lean back slightly in shock. Of course, sir. That will be £1. I hand her the coin, and as she turns to make the drink, I realize how quiet the room is. I look around and turn to see that the people from earlier are just looking at each other. No talking, just sort of staring. Okay then? My drink is put in front of me. It's not exactly difficult to pour boiling water into a teabag, so it really didn't take so long. I thank the girl, who is now just staring at me, walk over to the counter, lid off, pour a little milk in, lid on, and because I feel so uncomfortable, I try to power walk out. I get out the room, and I'm about to turn back down the hallway to the dressing room when I take a sip and my brain just goes heck, this needs sweetness. I'm maybe about 5 meters from the artist bar, facing away. Because the atmosphere felt so weird, I had a very brief debate with myself about going back. The hallway is silent, I would hear if people were walking down the hall, so when I finally decide, bugger it, I'll grab some sugar and leave, at best, a 15-second argument with my inner monologue. You can imagine my shock when I turn, walk up to the doorway, and the room is dark as heck because the lights are off. I poke my head in further and turn my phone flashlight on. Nobody at the counter. Nobody at the tables, the room is empty, and I heard nobody leave, there was no sign of anything. Unnerved beyond all else, I book it, somewhat gently, I'm not going to spill this drink, no matter how spooked I may be, back to my room. As I walk back in, I'm given a strange look by a chaperone. Where'd you get the drink from? Did you go up to the cafe? I'm confused, no, I just headed to the artist bar. Cue her confusion. The artist bar isn't open until 12 today. The saddest bit was I didn't get to finish my drink because we were called up for rehearsal, and cold tea is just forbidden. I've never had anything similar happen with the artist bar. When I described the counter girls to one of the organizers at the event, I was given a weird look and told nobody of that appearance was employed at the Albert Hall. I was on vacation with my parents. When I was a kid, we would go on these long road trips on motorcycles, sometimes to rallies to meet up with other bikers that my parents were friends with on the internet. One rally we went to every year was for this group called the Chain Gang. Their bikes were all chain-driven, like my mom's. This was on top of a mountain in Missouri, at Queen Wilhelmina State Park. You had to ride up these hairpin turns and curves around blind corners. My first time coming with them, they had gone without me before I was old enough to be put on a bike, maybe 9 years old. We got to the mountain around sunset, and before we were even halfway up, the sun is gone and we are shrouded in fog. I remember passing a reflective sign, the light of my dad's headlight passing through the fog and bouncing off the sign, and for a moment, I saw a gaunt ghostly figure with long hair and empty eyes, standing by the side of the road. The rest of the way up the road I feel haunted, followed? I don't know, it was a hard feeling to describe. My dad is a very serious, skeptical man, but I tell him what I saw when we get to the top, and he says, I wasn't gonna say anything, but I saw it too. The next day, we check out the sights. Turns out, this was a spot on the Trail of Tears. I was 16 at the time and was driving back roads with my older brother near our small town in Indiana, getting driving experience, about to get my license. We turned down a road that we've been down a plethora of times. Huge set of woods, forest on each side of the road where the trees are arched across the road and connected in the middle, making a tunnel of sorts. It was a good stretch of road where bits of the forest would get thin, and you could see through the thick trunks, but also some places where the brush and tress would be so thick it seemed almost impossible to even break the tree line. About 5 minutes into the drive, it gets extremely dense. Just as we get to the middle of the densest part, we notice an indent in the tree line, and when we drove closer, a huge gate started to come into view that was inset and looked to be guarded by 2 massive trees. Being that a gate has never been there, we drove into the little path that led up to the gate, which was cement, and got out. We looked around and both had an extremely weird feeling about the place. You know that feeling you get when you're alone in a house at 3 a.m. with no lights on and you're surrounded by windows? Yeah, that feeling. Looking through the gate was a continued cement path that took a very sharp turn, no more than 30 feet in, making it impossible to see what was beyond that point due to the thickness of shrubs, trees and brush. We nosed around a bit more looking for some way to get into around the gate, couldn't go over, the trees were massive, and the lowest hanging branch was easily 15 feet in the air, probably more with no notches to grab into, and the poles on the gate were straight up and down and very slippery. We were just about to try and tackle the countless thorns and try to make it through the trees when we both started hearing an extremely loud and labored breathing that sounded like it was just behind a wall of trees a few feet in front of us. We both panicked and got scared because of how odd the noise sounded and we darted. We asked our parents and grandparents about an estate-gated property on the road, and all of them said no one lives in those woods and there's no gates or paths anywhere. Just trees. We tried going back and finding it, but it's as if truly nothing has ever been there. Not even a slight indentation of where the gate was. Not a trace.